Let's talk about SJR4, Practical Planetology by Nigel Findley. This is the fourth in the Spelljammer resource sub-series of Spelljammer books for 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. This is technically actually the last of my month of Spelljammer, slightly delayed, the last review I planned to do. This is the second of those by Nigel Findley. The other was SJA2 Skulls and Crossbows, which I gave a really positive review of. In many respects, as a kind of really good space opera primer for Spelljammer. Now, this is not an adventure. That was technically an adventure. This is a resource. And the other resources are, there is a DM screen, there's a book of ships and encounters to do with new ships and encounters for those ships. I reviewed that, SJR1, Lost Ships. There's one about a city, SJR5, Rock of Bral. I've also reviewed that. This one is about planets, pretty obviously, that's the name. At the back says, basically the big thing is 15, you get 15 unique planets to do stuff in. And it contains material suitable for characters of any level. So it's meant to be an adventure supplement with settings in it. And this is a complement to other products because there's not really anything else which is dedicated to, here's just a bunch of interesting planetary ideas. Now, there are 4 SJR books other than this that kind of give planets and stuff. There's the 3 big, and there's one box set. So Astromundi Cluster, Realm Space, Grey Space, Kryn Space, Space Layers. They all give descriptions of planets or places, and in fact so do some of the adventures. But this is the most dedicated place for just, here are some cool planets to put out there in your game, so people can go and do cool stuff on cool planets. And this is fulfilling. If Skulls and Crossbows by Findley is actually really the main place where you get a kind of picture of how, not an adventure where you have to do set things to kind of fulfill a plot, but how to build space opera themes into your world. I think that's a really good one. It's the best Spelljammer product for that. This is, if you like, very slightly more your Star Trek product. Hear me out, but this is your hard sci-fi product. And so it is a complement, and I'll just give you the headline. So if you're not interested in anything else, here it is. Skulls and Crossbows is really quite good. I do really recommend it for Spelljammer. Practical Planetology is good. It's not as good. It's good. It's worth getting, or getting a PDF of, or whatever. What you get is, you get a 64-page book, is it? Yeah, 64-page, and then you get a single-sided, this is in the printed version, of course, a single-sided poster with a bunch of maps on it, which I might return to because they're kind of interesting, or some of them are. It has a wonderful Jaquays cover, like every Spelljammer, more or less every Spelljammer cover or picture with a ship in it. Occasionally you get tradesmen, but virtually always it's a Nautiloid or a hammerhead, a hammer ship, and here we have the Nautiloid again. So yes, it is 15 planets. Findley, also our space opera chief, brings us into the slightly more hard sci-fi side of things, and that actually shows up, by the way, I won't mention this again. Let's say some general features actually, and then I'll very quickly gloss the planets. General features. There is a degree of hard sci-fi in terms of there's discussion about how the planet is shaped, whether it has seasons, how light works on it, day length, things like that. Temperatures and why the temperatures are like they are and why they might change. Atmospheric conditions, gravity conditions. This is, in that sense, this is much more akin, you might say, to one of the planets collections from the old Star Wars D6 RPG, where you'd get your little fact box about all of it. It is in 2-column, like a lot of this era. That does mean you're not, it's reasonably readable for size, you're not necessarily super efficient for space compared to what you could be. It has a mixture of planets. It has each of the elemental types of planets. It has 5 earth bodies, rock base, 2 fire bodies, 3 water bodies, 2 air bodies, and 3 unusual or non-standard worlds. It then has, that takes up 50 pages of the 64, and the remainder is monsters. So, it has hard sci-fi about these types of elemental planet, and it gives you information about what the general conditions are, what species are natives to it, what groundlings are there, groundlings being the inhabitants, and also what adventure hooks there are. There are a couple of just general points that constantly come up, is that whenever there is an evil species on a planet, it wants to get off and steal Spelljammer ships, and if there's a good species, they don't want to. That's silly and borderline funny by the time it happens for about the 9th or 10th time out of 15. Another general observation I'll make, and I'll go through these and I'll pick up maybe 1 or 2 examples of this, is basically the entries. There are 15 entries over what in the end is, because of the introductory material, about 45 pages. So it's about 3 pages per entry, and it's basically too short for what is being attempted. Really, I think you could benefit from a lot more in terms of the size, and so one wonders whether or not you can have scrapped 5 of them and maybe simplify some of the monster stuff, or dropped 1 monster. Of course, that doesn't mean that Nigel Findley didn't like all these ideas, but John Nephew is the editor, and whoever is the line runner as well, need to make decisions. And I think an obvious weakness here is very often there is a sense that you get an idea of a planet, but then it's not quite finished off. You don't quite get how you do it. There's not quite enough detail to make an adventure on the fly with it. There's not like there's not a sample location or a couple of cool NPCs. It's just, here's some ideas, here's some stuff that's there, here's maybe some very general outlines for things you could do, and I think that is a real criticism, because one use you could have for this is not random encounters but random worlds. You go into a sphere and there's stuff there. If you've got a big map of stuff, you can just see these out there, and you don't need to prepare all of them. You can say there's 15 planets out there, plus the ones in the other, plus the ones I've made, plus the ones in the official products that fit around there. And I think that, so yeah, obvious weakness is basically, for all the fact it's 64 pages, it's got all this stuff in it, it's too short for what it's trying to accomplish. The final criticism, and this is again maybe more specific to I'll talk about the planets, is basically not all these ideas are born equal. Some are very strong, some are even presented in a way that makes them pretty runnable on the off, but some are bland or generic, or just, and this relates to the previous point, just not quite there. There's not quite enough conceptual density to be able to be like, here's just an idea, I'm going to get going with this, here's a couple of things I can make pop off. And sometimes that relates actually to the fact that you end up, and there are several planets like this, you're like, this is an incredibly tough planet for even mid-level parties to approach. They really have to be very thoroughly prepped magically to go to this very difficult planet, and that means that the ideas have to be even better. There has to be even more there to make it worthwhile, and maybe to set up bypasses, and Findley just doesn't often do that. So it means that some of the planets are basically, to salvage them, you're going to have to think about them. You're going to have to not just write up a locale and a couple of NPCs. You're going to have to write up basically the whole planet yourself again, and that means it's not been worth the effort. So, quickly give you these planets. What I say is just basic idea, what I think about it. Comperalon is an Earth world with lots of tectonic activity and a greenhouse effect from the volcanic activity, so it's quite warm. There is a native human or near human species ancestry called the Air, who are bald and tall and thin with snow white skin, trying to soak heat up, have lots of odd habits. Give some details about priests. Real atmospheric issues to do with acid, and then the adventure hooks. You might need to get repairs, but things are unstable. And you might need to rescue people. You're recognised by one AEA group, but another AEA group then wants to kill you because of their philosophical differences, or something like that. Or they are, they see you as a god, or something like that. Essentially, I like that there's dinosaurs on the planet. That is fun. This feels, though the world itself I can picture, it actually, there's some strong... Findley isn't an exciting writer, but he gets the job done. So there's this strong visual image of this caustic environment, this shaded place, the fact that you work and even farm in a place for many years, and then and of course it's fertile because it's volcanic soils, but then the lava flow moves. That's all quite effective. But I think it's as if there's just an idea there. Hey, there's some primitive-ish, near humans or humans there. You can hang out with them if you like. They're a bit weird, and that's just not much, is it? So I think, yeah, not very strong. Falx is enormous. It has a circumference of 62,830 miles. It's I think it's tectonically dead. Very small core. It's very hot. And the big thing about Falx is that because it's so hot on the surface, there's just underground races, and there are drow and dwarves and myconids, and there's two big illithid cities, and they are advancing. CO2 in the environment will tire people out. Hooks, things like you might want to help some dwarves survive illithid attacks. You might get captured by the illithids who might want to come and steal your ship as well. Things like that. I think they are spelljammers technically, the illithids. So yeah, I'm just not, this is a better idea. I really love this picture of these mind flare cities with different traditions and cultures. He says one's more traditional, one's more dynamic. These isolated dwarven groups and drow groups and myconid groups. And there's a hook for, some myconids steal something from you for some reason that you might not even understand. And they're not malicious, but you just got to deal with them because you need it before you leave. But there's a problem here that you've got a weird, unappealing world, and you've got to work to get your characters to go there, unless you give them a Strange New Worlds campaign type. Why are they going to go there? You've got to give them a strong hook, and then you've got to develop stuff on this whole world where you're being given the outline of big politics and wars, which, you can fill in, but you're buying a book to steal his ideas, and his idea is a good one, so why not have another page of it? Same problem, really, as I've already highlighted. That's a good one for... So Comparolon is... There's just not enough there. It's half an idea. Falx is... There's a really good idea, or set of ideas, but there's not enough detail. Armistice is kind of fun. At the end of the Unhuman War, some goblinoids surrender and get exiled there. And this is something which kind of is very merciful of the elves, but they also stop these guys becoming problems by being really high gravity. 3 times the gravity, protected by elven man of war. This essentially is just hard to go to, and I don't know why you need to go there. So again, it's an interesting idea, but Radol is a tidally locked planet which has a fertile ribbon round the middle. So sunside, dark side, and the ribbon. I like Radol. I like it. I don't love it. I still think having the majority of the planet be incredibly difficult for your PCs to operate in, even at mid levels, is a problem. Groups can get around it, but it's, at least in this case, it's you could go there, hang out in the ribbon, and then be like, I'm going to go out. We're going to prepare all these spells. We know what we're doing. We've got a ring of this. We've got scrolls of that. We've cast them. Let's go. Nonetheless, there's still, the very limited life in lots of these places. Great white worms and negative energy things on dark side. There's interesting kind of beetle. What are they called? Steelbacks and mithril dragons. So there's some fun, cool monsters. There's some ideas that come up on that. Radol, notably, is one of the couple of 4 pages, which means you get just a bit more going. The Radol fleet is from the ribbon is spaceborne, so that that is an exception to the good guys don't spell jam. But it's some stuff like missions to redeem yourself against the law. Basically, is you're sentenced to death unless you accept a dangerous mission. You need to go and find what the pseudo-humanoid shapes are on Darkside, or bring back an immature tunnel worm, or go and get a metal from Sunside, or kill a small Sunside dragon. It's also suggested that the creation of this world is a mystery, and there's a couple other planets that come up with this, where how this works it's kind of weird how it's designed, or seems to be designed. And that reminds me of Findley's other work in Skulls and Crossbows. Maybe we're talking about an older civilization which has made these. Bodhi is a earth body which has a ring of ice crystals. It's not massive, it's quite small, but it has a ring like Saturn or whatever. And loads of details about magnetic fields and volcanoes and stuff. It is a forest world. It has monstrous fish, and it has big condors, lots of insects. Yeah, there we are. It has green dragons, it has Tasloi, and it has high elves as well, who are intelligent, no magic particularly, no form of religion, and they know of only the existence of other stuff there, so there's no civilization really. Interesting, but, you know, oh, you want to land, there's green dragons dogfighting. You're hired by the IEN, the Elvish Navy, to investigate rumours of a lost colony. That's a good hook, by the way. That's a good hook. Yeah, I mean, it's just not very... Again, do you get the sense that this kind of like, yes, I can imagine a Star Trek episode involving those elements, but I can't see the tension or the drama. It's kind of just floating there. And so in that sense, where Radol sets up a couple of really interesting ideas, and that's the strongest of the Earth planets, I think. And yeah, the rest, all of them to some degree, have the same problem. I mean, Falk's less so. Falk's is just undetailed, but you have like three of those, I think, I'd just say there's not enough tension in them. There's not enough, buzz. One is really quite good, but you just need more space. And one has just enough going in the description that you're like, yes, I could do stuff there. You could even do a campaign or a whole adventure there. But yeah, and that's not wholly unrepresentative of the rest of the book. Both fire planets, Igni and Garash, have a massive problem with being inaccessible to anyone who's not insanely well prepared. The big gimmicks is that Garash is basically Jupiter. It's absolutely enormous. It's relatively cool for a fire world. That does mean that it still kills you if you're anywhere near its fiery surface, let alone further in. Has liquid fire around the equator. Has a cool moon which it kind of blast furnaces because it crosses through the ring. So it goes through the planetary ring every 25 days. There are continents of magical metal. The cool thing about Garash is there's a bunch of Azar on it, and maybe there's some evil stuff too, and you can maybe have to deal with that stuff. Ignia has a kind of holiday home for Afriti, including and this is on both planets. This quite cool animal called a sun swallow. It's in the monster section. Again, I like the idea that there's these cool Azar. I like that they might have to deal with bad guys of some kind. There's a continent near Zabri ruled by the Imix, Prince of Evil Fire Creatures, and it's drawing near to the Azar continent. That's fun. You have to fight off some Nazats. Okay, well that's just an encounter, isn't it? There's not much to do again. They're both okay ideas. They both share an idea of unmelting magical continents. They both have the idea of fire-based human-likes, not humanoids, strictly. Though the Azar, I guess, are, but human-likes. But neither really give you enough gristle to chew on. They are both a little bit difficult and vague, and that's going to discourage you from running them. Water bodies, Thalassa. Thalassa has like an upper and a lower level of water, I think is the point. Oxywater, that's it, yeah. Which is that you can swim through this is clever. Surface creatures can swim through the oxywater, as if breathing oxygen. Then there is a water layer below that, and the water layer has Sargin and Megalodons, and the oxywater mantle has mermen. and there is warfare between the merman and the Sargin, and this is okay. It's weird. There's no surface anywhere. It's a true water world in that way, and so there's probably a point where you're going to have to start making floating kelp cities and stuff. There are hints of that, but just so the PCs can go somewhere. But certainly and because, you know, where do these people go and lay their eggs and raise their young, I guess. The Sargin are obsessed with raiding stuff or stealing your Spelljammer. The merman might distrust you. The Sargin might kidnap you. The hooks on this one are bad, basically. But the idea is one of the better ones, I think. I think it works, basically. Charon is a ruined bit of an old planet with loads of liches on it. And it has a cool idea if you land on a place that looks nice. Reminds me of Third Witch World book by Andre Norton. But it's, again, you've got a couple of pages where you've been told, by the way, there's just a ton of lich civilizations. Under-detailed. Barbuda, really small, only 750 miles in diameter, lots of lots of interesting bits and pieces. There are again Sargin and sea sprites, and this kind of feels that I like this idea of this breathable atmosphere, many islands of rock and coral, normal water, salty. It has an iron core actually, and it keeps everything reasonably warm. Has some interesting monsters. The Bandalog turns up. It has a island inhabited by, is it silver dragons? I feel like. No, Coatl. Silver dragons are a different planet. Coatl. Yeah, again, you've got an interesting tension set up with the sea sprites who don't really want to fight the Sargin, but the Sargin want to fight them. And the Coatl kind of like the sea sprites, and we don't know why they're there, and that's kind of cool. I liked that. Barbuda I thought it was a workable location, and it's small enough that, and there's enough idea about, including an actual location, a small location, with some sense of the population and what they want. But again, there's kind of this sense that you're just like, here is half an idea which needs an extra page. Air bodies. Alabeth is a good air body. Alabeth is an enormous world with lots, size G, huge, roughly spherical one, 50,000 miles in diameter. Core of liquid fire, loads of layers, and the layers are all different ecologies. And they give a couple of sample ecologies. The first layer, birds and virtually nothing else, including a gigantic eagle type. The third layer, which is the one that you get the most stuff of, there are this unique ancestry, they're not sentient I guess, but like a unique monstrous race called Wholebags, gigantic balloons, balloon creatures which the species live on, basically. Elves and troglodytes live on them, they fight each other, they can farm on them, they can direct using heat sources the young Wholebags. This is great. This is actually, I should also say, only just over 3 pages, plus to be fair, well, about 3 pages actually, plus a good illustration and a monster manual entry. But the idea that you've got and it gives details about how troglodytes and Alabeth elves see each other and other people. And the differences. The troglodytes don't know how to ride the immature Wholebags, but they want to eat elves, and so they presumably breed well and therefore make up their casualties and go around trying to eat the elves. They might also be able to cut chunks out of Wholebags, and the Wholebags survive, which is a kind of interesting, because they're so big. Yeah, elves living on a Wholebag that's come down with a disease. They can't move on to another one due to the fact the next mating period is a long way away. And sky scavers, scavenging, flying things like space scavers in Spelljammer Core, are there to eat it, and you can help them or not. What's another one? So, yeah, some elves think you might be troglodytes. They haven't seen anything else. How do you convince them to let you land on their Wholebag and make repairs? Nubis is relatively small for an air world, and is just a well-behaved terrestrial. No solid land. there's airborne, but there are kind of semi-solid clouds, and on the clouds there are silver dragons, cloud giants, and storm giants. Here again, we get a decent amount of the interactions and the logic and theory behind these things. With some of the cloud giants being pretty peaceable, trying to farm, the silver dragons being good, and protecting the wyverns who fly around, which are kind of annoying because the wyverns are annoying, but the silver dragons are like, oh yeah, they're our cousins. But there's a bunch of good interactions here. This is one of those ones that is definitely easier to imagine throwing something into. It strikes me as I read this, and we're talking about, a planet which gets 1.5, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, pretty much, or something like that, is that it could just be bullet points the whole way through. I think a problem you're running into here is you're running out of space because everything has to be fully written up. What I really want is to have a couple more things where it's like, and these storm giants have this magical item, and this is why this powerful evil storm giant actually might be a threat to some of the other good factions. Very rarely are the good factions, except on Falx, on the real practical threat. The unusual, so yeah, both Air Worlds winners. The unusual or non-standard worlds, you have a ring world and a torus world, like a donut-shaped world, and a disc world. And they are all pretty good. I actually think they're all good, I would say. There's a suggestion with the ring and the torus, they also might be by some ancient builder civilization. And of course, this is a great hard sci-fi trope. Think Rama, think the ring builders in The Expanse. So this is Findley catching on to the idea that you're, as well as finding strange new worlds, oh, well, look at this weird air planet that there's different species on, and we're riding around on giant balloon creatures. Also, the idea is like there are weird signs of an ancient civilization that knows more than us, and perhaps is dangerous to discover more about. That's good. Those are classic exploratory sci-fi elements. So, yeah. Nothing more necessary to add too much on those. So very quickly, I guess, Nivell has lots of... It's massive. There's a whole thing where you get a special map. There's the torus is meant to be so you can see the way in which stuff cuts across it. But the ring world is because it's just a ring. You just get these three here. These three big strips to show you these are different areas and continents inside in massive oceans, and then it's just more random land for ages. And that's common because that's just how big this place is. That's a really cool idea. There is this one spacefaring civilization, but they actually only use their spelljammers to fly in the atmosphere. There's detailed rules about the difficulties of getting onto it, but how you get onto it. It's not as hard as lots of places. And it has all these details about this this kind of weird... quite kind of fun, but like this subrace of humans called the Alanti, who are basically incredibly morally advanced, lawful, good, but not too lawful, don't worry, monotheistic, constitutional monarchist. Findley was a Canadian place. It's a really interesting idea. That itself, by the way, even if you could say, oh well, bit of a Mary Sue civilization, I think it's just interesting that he was like, wouldn't this be a cool thing to be almost a utopian thing? And you're going to have needs to work with them. All the hooks basically have to do with the Alanti. The Alanti are fighting off evil dragons. Do you help or not? An evil-based society wants to capture skyships or your vessel to attack them. The Alanti have received a message from the other side of the ring, but that is 140 million miles away if you're going through the arc of the ring or whatever. So they need the PCs to fly out of their atmosphere because of the weird speed stuff. Or something is unstable. The artifact needs repair. Actually, you get to do a bit of a Dawn of the Overmind thing there, where you're like, oh, go into the machinery. Or Book of the Long Sun by Gene Wolfe. Taurus has like centaur people, and it has humans who've ended up there who sometimes clash. And so there is, in that sense, a settler indigenous kind of dynamic, which is presented fairly neutrally in terms of just these groups have these interests. The latecomers have where they do not work, where they have not accepted and worked closely with the centaurs, they struggle more. The centaurs like to fight. There's giant hornets. I like this world a lot in terms of the fauna. Again, you kind of sense that you'd get something out of just a couple of locations being detailed. The Atlanti being detailed at some length in the case of the previous of Niville of the Ringworld, and all the hooks leading to them actually give you a game, and that's what more of these worlds need. Plata is a disc world which has a bunch of animal kinds of things and native Aarakocra and some other weird stuff too. The monsters, you get some okay illustrations. Internal art is Mark Nelson, John Statema and Jim Holloway. It's all okay. The Mithril Dragon is okay. With blinding silver light, which is basically a radiation attack. That isn't it. That's a creative breath weapon. Azza from Garish, the Flame Swallow, which is kind of an impractical creature for most of us PCs or whatever to interact with. But there we are. Gyres are giant condors. This is maybe one thing, is I'm not sure we needed a special giant condor, or even the kind of fun pugnacious iguana, the Imbul of Falx. There's some sense that possibly this is where you save space to put detail into some of these worlds. The whole bag, you get a couple of pages, detailed ecology on that one. That does give you quest ideas. You can always question why a monstrous compendium entry is taking you 2 pages. Think about how rare that is in the first edition manuals. Scavers from Sky, steelback beetles, who are interesting in terms of the ways they work and stuff that you might want them for, how they mate. Strangler plants and the Zap, this weird. It's literally like, it looks like a ship. It looks like an airship. They're just species of sentient ships, aeroplanes who fly around, a bit like Decepticons or something. So, all that to say, that's a pretty detailed kind of look at I'm glossing over the planets themselves, but just like, here is all the stuff. It's solid, basically. You're probably getting the picture from me, is that I really love, some of the planets are really good and work as they are. You could add a page to them, but you're like, yeah, that would really help. But you're not kind of crippled without it. Alabeth, Niville, maybe Taurus, maybe Barbuda, Redole, Falx. Like half of the planets then are like, oh yeah, maybe with just a bit more information, or I can run it now, I've got ideas now, with a bit more information I can make it really good. On the other hand, the other half are very often ones where they are a page off being finished. There aren't enough words. You're struggling to get a sense of why your characters bother going there and what they do there. And here's the thing with products you buy, the DM's job is to run a game for their players. If they buy products, they want that product to create content for them, usually in some format. To be like, here's more tables, here's more ideas, here's more monsters or spells. And a setting book like this one should give you some sense of why you're going there. I think essentially 15 planets was probably too many. The number of new monsters and the way the monstrous compendium pages are laid out, albeit they're hard printed in, they're not loose, is restrictive. And I think it leads to a compromise of a product. However, at its best, Findley manages to... and it's decent then. But at its best, I think it becomes more than decent with Findley managing to capture some of the kind of weird ideas you can get with different planets. Like, what about an air planet where all the layers are different, and one of the layers between clouds, and one of the cloud layers it's got like giant balloons in it. What about, there's a world and this one, as I say, I think actually has some limitations, but there's a world and there's just these gigantic illithid cities on it that, underground, that are building space Spelljammers, and the only resistance is some dwarfs and some drow. Can you not see the possibility in that one? That's fascinating as a concept. Or again, there's there's this this world with this ring world that you've got to work out the mystery of. You might need to go inside it to fix it. It's this thing where you might have your concept of the universe challenged and broken because you've kind of got caught up in the other side, the space opera, the space fantasy side of Spelljammer. So yeah, I think it is worthwhile. I think it is basically the main resource like it, and therefore it kind of has to be considered. Unless you're just like, I'm going to run Realm Space, in which case I should talk about one of those books next time I do a Spelljammer group of reviews. But yeah, it has limitations that show the editing limitations and the expectations that rather than saying, I really need you, Nigel, to just come up with some gameable points and locations, quantity of places and ideas and pages of monsters end up being the real key product. Anyway, if you've read it, tell me what you think in the comments. And I guess what are other comparable sci-fi RPG products that might be good models for writing about Spelljammer planets? Till next time.